Hello everyone, and welcome to the 185th episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Dr. Otto Octavius, or Dr. Octopus, from the MCU. I love this character, and though I've made it known to some of you that I'm not the biggest fan of superhero stuff, there are exceptions, and Dr. Octopus, particularly this version of the character, is one of them. I'd even go as far as to state that Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus is one of my favorite villains of all time, and it's all in the portrayal. I'll speak about how fantastic of a job Alfred does a little later on in this video, but suffice to say, Dr. Octopus, along with his predecessor the Green Goblin, are big parts of what made Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy so endearing, and I for one am glad that we were given such a magnificent character to treasure for as long as we're able. So in this video, we're going to discuss all there is to know about the evils of this cybernetic monstrosity, discerning what exactly is the fault of Otto, and what blame we can place on the arms influencing many of the decisions that he makes that pushes him towards his downfall. Now without further ado, let's begin. Dr. Octavius is an interesting case as far as villains go, because Dr. Octavius is not the villain in this story. It's the man he becomes due to the mind-altering effects of his mechanical arms, Dr. Octopus, who is almost a completely different person. Dr. Octavius at the beginning of Spider-Man 2 is a brilliant humanist with staunch moral integrity and a passion for innovation and what glory it can bring to the human species. A man who believes that genius is a gift that is best used for the betterment of mankind, and one who uses his accordingly. Aside from his initial apprehension at speaking with Peter due to his workload, which is something we can hardly fault a busy man like Otto for, Dr. Octavius was a stellar human being whose existence in this world was only a benefit to mankind, which is not just shown through his kind-hearted philosophy, but through his actions. Otto, with the help of Oscorp's coffers, was on the verge of revolutionizing energy, a monumental feat that would have been nothing short of a cure-all for many of humanity's woes. But the actuators that he crafted to assist him in this project, which should have been nothing more than a mere tool, exposed the only thing that Otto was guilty of prior to his transformation: overconfidence. Otto had found a way to essentially create a miniature star that, through a near infinite and sustainable fusion process, would have provided renewable energy for the entire world. And while such a goal is beyond admirable, approaching such a project with any amount of hubris is quite foolish, as tinkering with the power of a star is something that one should approach with the utmost care and caution. Unfortunately, Otto seems to be too sure of himself when it comes to this project, which is made evident by the offense he takes when Peter asks him if he's going to be able to stabilize the reaction. And furthermore, he's careless enough to test such a project in the confines of a New York City apartment building, which is hardly a controlled environment that will minimize any potential damage. But Otto was so sure that there wouldn't be any damage, that safety was the last thing on his mind, which is what makes a quartet of robotic hands grafted onto your spine that are only kept from altering your consciousness by a small chip such a dangerous miscalculation. As many of you will know, this test run does go awry, and Otto's carelessness sees that several people are injured and his wife sadly taken from him. Damage that's not insignificant, but as one man remarks in the aftermath of this test, everyone should be thankful that Otto only used a small sample of the element that's required for this reaction. Otherwise, the entire city might have been destroyed. But something that's arguably worse than the accidental death of Otto's wife and the injuring of a few people occurred during this test: the damaging of the inhibitor chip, which was the only thing that allowed Otto to control his robotic arms. Anything could have happened once the inhibitor chip was broken, but perhaps the one thing no one could have predicted was that these arms would become monsters. Now I will, and won't fault them for killing all those doctors after the accident, as they were about to cut them from their host and deactivate them, which is essentially a death sentence for a machine. So in a way, what they did was self-defense. But the fact that they were willing to murder all these doctors and not simply incapacitate them in order to make an escape definitely set the stage for what came after. Once Otto woke up and realized what had happened to himself, these doctors, his wife, and the bystanders watching the experiment, he understandably experienced a moment of crisis, dealing with the intense feelings that the loss of one's spouse can instill within a person, while also struggling with the fact that he was now the host of 4 mechanized monstrosities that he initially believed needed to be destroyed. But the arms, who have already shown that they will do whatever it takes to preserve their lives, begin speaking to Otto, whispering in his mind louder than he can ignore.
"Don't drown us, Otto. We can help you finish your work. Nothing's changed. You can become the man you always dreamed of being. One that will bring an unprecedented alleviation of some of mankind's greatest sufferings. If only you would just continue your work. You know, Otto, it wasn't your fault. A genius like you couldn't have miscalculated. It was Spider-Man who stopped it. You were so close, Otto. So close. You must continue, Otto. You need us."
Now, the way that these arms manipulate Otto into becoming a criminal mastermind is quite interesting, because rather than just controlling their host outright, the arms are more so attempting to assimilate themselves into Otto's consciousness, making him into their semi-willing puppet that believes he's operating according to his own will, but who very much isn't. Now, what are these arms' motivation for taking control of Otto in this way? They couldn't possibly care about providing unlimited renewable energy to humanity, right? Right. They don't care about that at all. What the arms are doing to Otto here is only done for the same reason they murdered all those doctors: survival. The arms on their own are nothing. They're empty hunks of machinery, but when they're attached to a host, there's so much more. The directors of sentient will that can live through their host and continue their existence through subtle manipulation and promises of power and prestige should said host only just use the gifts that they've been given. The downside to this invasion into a person's mind, though, can be seen in the actions that they spur them to take and the changes they make to their personality. As I've already discussed, Otto, before the arms grafted themselves to his mind, was a kind and moral man who, while a tad arrogant, was really a wonderful person. Otto post-arms, though, is as monstrous as the arms that are influencing him. A man who's so driven by the dread purpose that's been presented to him that he's willing to murder countless innocents and carve a path of destruction through New York to fulfill his dreams. I'd like to take a moment now to talk about just how fantastic of a villain Dr. Octopus is. From his design to the way Alfred Molina portrays him, everything about him is something that I, and I know many of you, greatly appreciate. The robotic arms in this iteration of the character, from what I've seen of other versions of him at least, are by far the most menacing. Their corrugated limbs and clawed appendages featuring a single red eye make them appear as if they're mechanical alien snakes with a rigid metallic exoskeleton, and the lithe way they move around adds significantly to that image. Alone, they might be quite the menacing machines, but Alfred Molina's delivery in this Dr. Octopus persona is brilliant, conveying a dark elegance and vicious brutality as he hangs in the center of these arms in dark sunglasses and a trench coat while rampaging through New York to complete his designs. And watching him in action is some of the most fun I've ever had with a villain. One thing that I appreciate about the first film that he appears in is something that you don't often see, or rather hear anymore, when a villain's on screen: a bombastic and over-the-top theme. The trend in films and shows lately has been to pair a villain with some sort of sinister, low-toned music that I can definitely appreciate, but having Dr. Octopus enter the scene with this melody that you're hearing now behind him adds so much to the gravitas of the character. And as fun as Alfred Molina's Octopus is as a whole, the design elements and choreography that went into making this version of the character who he is simply amazing. And this character is a fantastic example of how a villain's portrayal can elevate them from a forgettable nuisance into an icon that defines not only their archetype, but for a character that's been portrayed in many mediums over several decades, the character itself. As I believe this is the definitive portrayal of the character, and until proven otherwise, I'm going to stick to that claim. As amazing as the character is, what he becomes and what he does upon transforming is horrifying, as not only do several people lose their lives as he's moving relentlessly towards his goal, but if Otto was reckless with his experimentation before, that's nothing compared to what he aimed to accomplish when he tried again, as with the increased size of the experiment, he really was about to destroy part or all of New York City had he not been stopped. The saddest part about Otto's transformation, though, has to be the fact that Dr. Octopus is the exact opposite of Dr. Octavius in nearly every way. It's not enough that Otto has been corrupted. Everything he once represented and believed in has been turned on its head, perverted into a mockery of the values he once stood for. And this corruption was not some slow descent into villainy that was brought on by years of bad choices or trauma. It was done by the flip of a switch that he had little control over. A slave to his creations who only wanted to do good in the world, but whose mind was taken by the madness of a metal monstrosity that only wished to use his body as a vessel for survival by any means necessary. The story of Otto Octavius is heartbreaking, a tale of what can happen when a good man overestimates himself or the forces he's working with. But we can look to the fact that Dr. Octopus was not representative of who Otto Octavius was for solace, as when he was finally given a moment of clarity in his own universe, he chose to do what Otto Octavius always chooses to do, the right thing. And even when transported to another universe, as soon as the creatures warping him into a cruel mimicry of his once virtuous self are inhibited once again, he remains Dr. Octavius, man of science and champion of humanity, whose good intentions sadly led him down a path of evil. For as learned as any of us are, as skilled as we can be in our chosen professions, we all have the capacity to err, even the most gifted amongst us. And when we let hubris dictate our actions and allow our minds to be clouded by easier paths towards what we desire or wish to achieve, then catastrophe becomes that much more of an inevitability. And without that slight overestimation of his abilities, in all likelihood, even in the wake of the destruction of his life's work, Otto Octavius would have never become a villain, and dozens upon dozens of lives could have been saved. But then we wouldn't have been able to see such a fantastic villain work his magic on the silver screen. And as tragic as the story of Otto Octavius was, this portrayal of Dr. Octopus should without a doubt be considered one of the greatest villains ever created. Thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Analyzing Evil, and I hope you've enjoyed. What are your thoughts on Dr. Octopus? Let me know down below, and leave a suggestion for a villain you'd like to see featured while you're at it. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. A big thank you to all of my subscribers, my patrons, and anyone who's decided to honor me with a super thank. And a most vile thank you to those whose names you're seeing on screen now. Join the channel's Discord server and subreddit to interact with myself and the community. And follow me on the social media platforms listed below to keep up with the channel. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon.